Welcome to Epistemology Online, where the idea is to get people to articulate what they believe to be true and false, good and evil, and their rationale behind it. Hopefully a different way of discourse online.
Got 15 minutes. Ask away, whatever you want to know.
So I preface this to say that many years ago we had this conversation and a lot's happened in those same years. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how the government talks about and enforces legalization. So let's start off with like marijuana. Do you think the government should interfere in that? And what do you think it should look like?
Sure. I'll start with what I think it should look like, and then I think you can infer the rest. I think it should look like, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, that no one, whether it be a government or another individual or a private corporation or anybody else, ought to be able to interfere with your body. So I would say that government ought not prevent anybody from doing anything that is not harming another. Not the potential to harm another, but is not harming another, to be super specific. Like, alcohol, this is soda water, but if it was alcohol, I could potentially get drunk and potentially hurt someone. That doesn't mean it should not be permissible for people to consume, only if I am hurting someone. That's whenever you have a crime. That's kind of my thoughts around it.
Yeah. So do you think the government has a right to put people in prison for like drugs that wouldn't, by your definition, be hurting anyone?
No.
No.
No. The short answer is no. The longer answer would probably have to be like, I guess, to really go back to like the second conversation that we had, where it's like, what do I define a government as, and what is a just position of a government within society? But the short answer would be no.
Right. So obviously that's not the system that we're living in. Some states, there are things that are legal. Some states, there are things that are not. But in a lot of cases, you have these corporations coming in and kind of taking over these small CBD shops and weed shops in the places where it is legal. So how should corporations be able to profit off of this once it is legal? Or should there be different things in place for the people who have been maybe arrested for this before and have had these small, albeit illegal, pot farms? What happens to them once it's legalized?
Wow, what a question. Okay, I'm going to try to fire the question. No, it's all good. I'm going to fire the question back to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah.
So let's assume for a moment that specifically marijuana in this particular instance, the psychoactive side of things, not just CBD, was legalized tomorrow across any given region. Should corporations, or I would define as a group of individuals working together to make some kind of profit together, typically, be allowed to make money on this, or should there be restitution for people who were, for example, serving jail sentences for possession of the product that they are now selling? Is that correct? Am I hearing the question correctly?
I think so.
Okay. There's many layers. It's like onions. It's got layers. Okay. So, Okay. So let's start with somebody who's wrongfully imprisoned. If somebody's wrongfully imprisoned, they're owed restitution by those that wrongfully imprison them. I think if somebody initiates force against somebody wrongfully, then the person who does the initiating of the force has to foot the bill. They can't pass it off to someone else because they are the government. That individual who did that act, acts can only be done by individuals. Groups are conceptual tags we place onto individual meat lumps that walk around with sweet wetware inside their brain. So restitution would have to come from those that wrongfully arrested, wrongfully convicted, wrongfully jailed, wrongfully kept them in a cage. As far as
the specific police officers that arrested those people, or the people that enacted those laws, or the whole system?
Why not all of the above? So I think those that actually use their bodies to carry something out would be culpable. I'm just doing my job thing, I don't think that would work. As people found out in the Nuremberg trials, a la like Nazis can't say, well, I was just doing my job. No. You can't kill people in the same, not you, obviously. The the Nuremberg people over there on that side of the screen. In the same way, the people that attacked people for banning alcohol in the 1920s, I think, are morally corrupt. And then as far as like somebody telling you to do something, like, I hereby declare that you cannot consume alcohol or marijuana or own gold or help free slaves. Those were all laws on the books at one point in the U.S. I think they'd be culpable. I don't know to what degree, but that would probably be something that'd have to be thought on for a bit.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, though, comparing it to like the Nuremberg trials. Like in one instance, people were systematically like executed, basically, like killed in droves. And in this case, it's small drug crimes where, yes, they're not necessarily dying from it, but they're losing their whole lives by being put in prison. But I guess the question is the cop who is just doing their job in this instance and following the law that's been, again, to talk about our government discussion, that's been the people who we elected made the laws, et cetera, are they really to blame if they're just following the law that they're supposed to follow?
Well, let's take it out of the realm of something that most would consider relatively trivial in the realm of like marijuana and put it into something that I think most people could get behind, which is slavery being bad. So in the 1800s, there is a law, the Fugitive Slave Act, that's passed that basically says you cannot help a slave escape. So you would be breaking the law by giving shelter. You would also be required to participate compulsorily, like you will be thrown in jail if you do not, in a slave catching patrol. Well, I think I would still be morally culpable for going out and catching somebody because it's my job. Now, if somebody literally has a gun to my head and is saying, like, do this or else I'll shoot you, I think the guy with the gun to my head is the one that's responsible for that point. There was a book that I read by Robert Heinlein called The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It's about the moon being like a prison colony where people are shipped to, but then they can't come back to Earth because like their bodies get so used to 1/6 gravity. And it's their story of how they try to become independent. But in it, there's a guy, one of the guys is named Professor de la Paz, and he says, I am free no matter what rules surround me. If I find them tolerable, I tolerate them. If I find them too obnoxious, I break them. I am free because I know that I alone am morally responsible for everything that I do. And I read that and I was like, wow, that's like something for me to remember. So, because I think a lot of people, I think this is a big problem. A lot of people try to put the moral blame for their individual actions on other people. They made me do it, right? They made me do it. No, I don't think you can transmutate somebody's wrong action onto another person by saying it was just my job. I don't think there is any cop-out because I believe that I am morally responsible for everything I do and that you are for everything that you do. And I don't think there's any cross-pollination between those two because we're two different individuals.
Yeah. So do you think there'll be legalization across the country in our lifetimes?
I think so totally not bearing on the morality of the situation, I predict there will be legalization but not decriminalization, which are two different statuses under the laws of the U.S. Decriminalization being it's not moderated. I can drink as much of this orange and cream soda, fizzy water, as I'd like. There's no special taxes added onto it. There's no restrictions placed upon my possession of it. I can't go to jail for having too much as an intent to distribute. Yeah.
Gotcha. So going back to the corporate side of things. So we have this whole group of people across all different races and situations who have been criminalized for this in the past. But let's say tomorrow it's legalized everywhere. Do you think that those people, again, should be able to start their own businesses and start selling it legally? And how does that relate to corporations coming in trying to make multi-million dollar profits? And then how do we regulate how weed, for example, that it's a certain potency, that it's safe? How do we do all those things in an environment where it kind of used to be a free-for-all as long as you're willing to break the law?
It's a free-for-all as long as you're willing to break the law.
Right.
So that was a very multi-layered question. Let's see if I can.
I'm bad at this.
Can you feed it to me a line at a time, and maybe we can find if there's any disagreement, and then talk about that rather than try to answer all?
Yeah. So we'll start with, how do corporations fit into this, where something's been illegal for so long? Is it morally right for them to automatically start making a huge profit off of it when people have literally gone to prison for this before?
Okay. In which case, definitions would be important. Morally right being, if it's morally wrong, I think the definition, let me know if you disagree with this. For something to be morally wrong, that means a third party can use force to stop that moral wrong from happening. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I would say like the big four moral wrongs that most people agree on are murder, theft, assault, and rape. If you see one of those things happening, you can use force to stop it. Compared to like an aesthetic wrong of like, I prefer people to be on time to meetings. I can't like attack somebody for being 5 minutes late to a business meeting.
Right.
There's a different kind of set of responses to that.
Yeah. So wrong in the sense of, I guess more, is it fair? I think is more what I think I'm going for. Is it fair that people who have gone to jail for this in the past, or who have had small businesses where they are selling it in states where it's legal, being shuttered because huge corporations are coming and buying them out? Is that a fair system, that these people who have been in this society of weed for years are being kicked out of their own system that they've been a part of?
Be kicked out of the weed selling system?
Right. Because this is why it's multi-layered, is because
Sure.
when the government intervenes and puts regulations on it, it makes the process to produce more expensive. And therefore, the small sellers who might have had a small farm now can no longer afford to sell because they can't meet all of those regulations. So how do we allow those two things to live together, to where we can regulate it to where it's safe, but we also allow small businesses to be able to afford the work that they're doing?
I'm going to go full firebrand and say I wouldn't let them coexist. I would say do away with all the regulations and let people do what they want to do with their own bodies.
So how do we, as consumers, then make sure that what we're being given is safe? Because these are drugs. Like, weed may not be something that's super detrimental to your health, but as far as how high you get when you take it, you might want to know that beforehand. So how do we know that what we're taking is safe and we know what we're buying is what they're selling?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I would want, well, I'm not a purveyor of such substances, so I wouldn't know like what scale to measure it on. So I'll take it into something that I know a bit more about, like, I don't know, audio gain. So like I have a little soundboard here that controls my microphone. I can, adjust how loud it is. There's a scale called decibels that are used. I want to know what the dynamic range of a product is. Like there's a whole spec sheet on it whenever I'm buying a thing. That's the way I prefer to buy things. But fundamentally, the way that I prefer to buy things may be totally different than the way that other people prefer to buy things, which some people will buy something because it has R, G, and B lights on it. And they're like, wow, red, green, and blue. This is awesome. Which is not the way I buy things. But that, to each their own. I don't hold a grudge against them for doing that. So I guess if somebody, to bring it back to marijuana in this case, if somebody wanted to consume something that has really, 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 really potent stuff that's going to trip them out for a while, and they want to do lots of research before doing that, okay. And if they don't and they just want to dive straight in and munch on a bunch of gummies, okay. I guess, it's kind of like it's what they want to do. As long as no one's like forcing them to eat it, I don't really have a problem with it. As far as like, would I stop them physically? Now, aesthetically, I have my own standards for who I choose to associate with. I have my own standards for what I find to be decorum and acceptable in society and in interacting with people. And I have things that I would detest and ostracize over. Like I would not talk to somebody over. But yeah, so hopefully that puts you in the right direction.
Yeah. So a quick last question as far as to just legalize everything, no restrictions, no regulations. Would that also apply to like health and safety as far as like food is concerned? To put it to a non-drug related thing?
I don't think there can ever be a moral case where somebody can threaten you with violence if you don't do what they want, which all regulations are backed with threats. So if there's no threat and it's just like, hey, we recommend, that's different. But from my understanding, there are fines. And if you don't pay those fines, then there are bigger fines. If you don't pay those, eventually a man with a gun will show up to your house and threaten to put you in a cage. And I think that is morally detestable and will not stand the test of historical scrutiny in the future. It's not a good way of getting people to behave. There are better ways, people. There are better ways.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's it for the 15 minutes. I'm happy to go one more round if you're interested. Either which way, me asking you questions, you asking me questions, whatever. Yeah, was this fun thus far?
Yeah.
My hope is that people can start listening to what other people are saying and try to understand like how they're thinking. That's kind of my goal.